ADHD is not a mental illness. It's just a different operating system.
Right.
And I think that's so empowering. And when I get to be on podcasts, I always try and say that because it's like, I want the people out there who have different brains like you and I do to hear that and embrace it, right? We're not broken. We're just different.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. Now, everybody listening to us, they say, we know where Canada is, and we know where British Columbia is. Where is Prince George? Well, you likely know Victoria on Vancouver Island, and we know Vancouver. We are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or for our European friends, 800 kilometers. That puts us in the center of British Columbia, north to south, east to west. Now, the interesting part today is we have a very, very interesting guest, Dr. Matthew Zakreski. He has an amazing background. He's the co-founder of the Neurodiversity Collective, and he provides therapy, IQ testing, coaching, and consulting. He's also an author, a very in-demand speaker, and talking in particular on issues of diversity. And today, he's not only just by himself, but his sweet daughter is with him too, because his wife is a little bit under the weather. What's her name, Doc?
So this is Sten. And Sten, how old are you, bud?
3.
And when do you turn 4?
June 20th.
Yeah, so your birthday's coming up, right?
Oh, nearly happy birthday for you, Stan. We love having you on our podcast.
Hey, this is your first podcast. Pretty cool, right? Listen, can you go play with your sister while I go talk to these people?
Can you see me, Stan? Wave to me.
You
Hi,
wave?
Stan. So she will be coming in and out of the podcast, everybody, and we like that because it's all part of the way we do podcasting. Now, Dr. Matthew, do you mind if I call you Matt?
Please, I prefer it, actually.
Okay. So where are you located, Matt?
I'm in New Jersey in the United States, in a small town called Zakreskis. About yeah, and yes, you just told everybody our address.
She is so sweet, right? Yeah.
Oh my goodness! I can't wait for the fan mail, pal. So we're about an hour west of New York City.
Yeah. So a beautiful area. I've been in the region. Can be very busy there, especially if you're not overly familiar with it, but it's still very, very beautiful. Now, Matt, can you tell us something about your specialty is particularly into neurodivergent clients? What does that really mean? Now, before you answer that, then I should mention to you, which you may or may not know, I'm potentially fall in the category of clients. I'm ADHD and I'm also dyslexic. So,
Oh wow!
yeah.
You're definitely one of the people. So,
Yeah.
so the reason I do what I do is I grew up as a gifted student. Yes, I know, buddy. And I was diagnosed with ADHD in high school, which honestly explained a lot. But part of the reason that no one noticed I had ADHD was because I was so smart, right? And so if you forget there's a test because you have ADHD, but you learn very quickly because you're gifted, you get away with it. You get a 92 on the test. Everyone thinks, oh, you're really smart. And we just keep getting away with it and your behavior never changes.
Yeah.
And I realized early on that I wanted to work with kids like me. I wanted to work with kids with different brains in a world that doesn't really support people with brains like that. And one of the reasons I was attracted to your podcast is that I feel like you and I speak a very similar language, right? It's like, here's how you make your passion, your skills work for you, whether the world is friendly to that or not.
I'm a superpower. That's what I call it. ADHD is a superpower. And like you, it took me 50 years before I knew what is different about me, because I academically was not very successful. I failed grade 3. I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, she's all good. Then we said, what are we going to do with this, guys? And some people said, well, maybe we have to send him to a mentally challenged school. My parents said, no, they were beautiful. Let's send him somewhere and have him learn a trade. So I became a furniture maker. And then adding some quick pieces here so that it puts it more in context as to who I am, and particularly interacting with you. Then I was born in 1940, so I will be 84 this year, and in northeastern Holland, and things were very, very tough and difficult. And so as a result, saw far too much that I shouldn't have seen, and then resulted in PTSD, the inner child, and a number of other things. And then we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And from that point forward, I was so impressed by the Canadians that liberated us that I always knew I wanted to go to Canada. And so I was going to go when I was 17, and then my parents wouldn't let me, and then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, and then finally I went to Canada when I was 23 years old. And so I didn't speak the language. I didn't have a job, and I didn't know anybody. And so I came to Canada, and I wanted to start. I always kind of felt I had failed in a way. I was still very optimistic and very go-go, but so I wanted to start with nothing. So I, to prove to me that I could be just as good as all the kids that I grew up with. And as you know, young people can sometimes be hard on a person, so that all my friends that had gone to college, universities, were all of a sudden not my friends anymore because I was a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was a bit of a challenge. But I wanted always to prove to me that I could do just as well as the others. So I left Holland with a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, 150 Canadian dollars. When I left Amsterdam for Montreal, I was going to build a lumber mill in British Columbia because my dad had been in lumber, my grandfather was a master carpenter, and I wanted to start with nothing. So when I came to Vancouver by train from Montreal, I went to the immigration office, and there was a German fella, and I could speak some German. And I told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. That's where I am now, 60 years. That's where all the opportunities are. So I came to Prince George. I can still see the Greyhound station from where I'm in my studio here. And with my suitcase, my 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. But what I had lots of is that I knew my dream was to build a lumber mill, and I had always a positive attitude. I avoid the negative, even already when I was a kid. And if I have a passion, if I like something, I give it 150%, relates to you anyway. And then work ethic. I work harder than anybody. And so I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always think I'm late. I always make my bed. And then from there on in, I build. It took me within 2 years, I had a little piece of a sawmill. And from there on in, I built a fairly large company. I'm not bragging here about things that I did, but just for the benefit of our guests watching what will happen if you have that passion. But it took me from the time, Matt, that I left school at 13, wandering 13 years old and became a laborer. It took me, I was already here in Prince George for 32 years, and from 65 to 1997. that I walked in a bookstore and I picked up a book. I still don't know why I did that. And I opened the book, and the title was Driven to Distraction by Dr. Halliwell. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in the book in 1997, now I finally know who I am. And so it changed my life. But it took me 50 years. Then, and the other part that happened when I first read it, I was already building companies, and so there was a certain amount of shame involved and stigma. And I was building companies, and I make proposals to bankers. I want to lend from them hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to build companies. What am I going to do? And then, I sit there and I make presentations to them, which are always very, very good. But then I have to say, I have to tell you about my mental illness. I got ADHD. Then you would say, have a nice day. Not now, but then, right? So it took me 5 years before I went to my family doctor that delivered our two daughters, who was also a personal friend. And I come into his office, he says, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And so we looked at it and did all the things that we have to do. And I was diagnosed. By then, I was 62 years old. 50 years of wondering what was different about me, and it kind of unlocked from where I would go from there on in. I became then an in-demand speaker, keynote speaker. I started writing books. The first book that I wrote, Against All Odds, actually. I thought about it for 20 years. They say to me, John, you should write a book. And I started writing books, as you well know, is not easy. And then, so I thought about it for 20 years, and then finally I knew if I didn't do it now, it would never happen. And so I said, it took me 80 years to live, but 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. But the point that I was going to make is that I then understood that I could do a lot more things, and all of a sudden it opened the door to doing more things. I've done now, I'm working on my 5th and 6th book. I have 10 different companies, and I'm very, very active in a number of areas. And a lot of people say to me, how do you do all those things? ADHD, that's how I do it.
Right? Yeah.
So that kind of, and then the other part that I did, my second book that I wrote, is that I feel I have an obligation, in a way like what you were saying, to speak about issues from a lay perspective as an ADHD person. And I felt I had to write a book about it, and I did, ADHD Unlocked. Now, the other part that I have to just add to it before I open the floor for you here, because I just give you this stuff that makes it a little bit more interesting from your perspective as to who is this guy, is that you are podcast number 256. Now, podcast number 203 is Dr. Halliwell. And I got him on my podcast. And after all these years, the circle came around the world. And so when we were on the podcast together, and we'll get a picture of him on the frame here, is that I in my interaction with Dr. Podcast, I told him about the book, obviously, and then that the more I got to know about it, the more I believed it was a superpower, and he agrees with me. And the other part that I believed is that the more I looked at it, the more the frequency of occurrence initially was thought around 8% of the population. I became aware that it was much higher than that, and I thought around 20%, and I said that to Dr. Halliwell, and he said, no, John, more than 25%. And I agree with him. And then the other part that we talked about, and Scott will show the picture of Dr. Halliwell on our screen here, but the other part that we talked about is that among successful CEOs and successful entrepreneurs, I believed, I mentioned to Dr. Halliwell, the frequency of occurrence is likely 50%. And he said, no, John, it's more than 75%. And I agree with him. So, and so that's how I feel, although it took me 50 years to kind of figure out who I was. I now feel I have an obligation to speak about it wherever the opportunity presents itself. And I do that not in my podcasting, not only about that topic, a lot of other topics, but I believe it is very important for me to speak about it.
I mean, your story is so inspiring, and I mean, it's very much the dream we want for people with different brains is not just being successful, because yes, being successful is wonderful, hooray for that, right? But it's about understanding who you are and using that as a way to empower yourself. Like, not with anything to apologize for, not for anything to, to sort of hold yourself back with, but to lean in to the parts of your brain that make you special.
Exactly.
As an ADHD myself, I mean, it made me a better stand-up comic. It made me a better improv actor. There are times it makes me a better husband and father. There are times it doesn't.
No, and right? Same as me. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But then when it's not something you feel like you have to apologize for,
right,
it gives you permission to play to its strengths, right?
Exactly.
When I do my workshops, I ask the room, let's plan a party together, right? Let's plan a birthday party for Jim, right? And I say, what do you guys want to do? And people naturally sort themselves into their best things. Janice wants to bake some cookies, and Mike wants to tend the bar, and Steve wants to DJ, and Sally wants to do the decorations, and Pedro doesn't even want to come. Pedro doesn't do parties. And I'm like, and that's how life should be. But instead, we put people in these boxes where it's like, Pedro, I've arbitrarily decided you're cooking. You're grilling the hot dogs.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Amazing.
It makes me think that that the more people hear this story, and it's funny because I have Driven to Distraction on the bookshelf behind me here. I also have your book on my shelf here. It's over there somewhere. I'm not going to upstage myself and go get it. That's for the after show, I guess.
Is it this one that you have, or which one is it?
No, the
Against All Odds.
Against All Odds. I was like, oh my gosh. Because all I can think of is on the Brink because it's right in front of me.
I'm going to send you the other ones as well that I have. For sure. I'm going to sign all of them and send them to you. So yeah.
I mean, they say never meet your heroes. I mean, like you are even better than I thought you would be, sir, and you already had me. I don't have to butter your butt anymore. So, but it's this idea that the only limit is what we're willing to take on, the amount of distress we can tolerate, right? I mean, there are many people who would not move continents with 2 sets of clothes, 3 books, and 2574, if I have the number right in my brain.
25.
That's right, awfully close. But if you can tolerate that kind of discomfort, if you can be comfortable being uncomfortable, then really you blow the roof off what you're able to accomplish. Exactly. And I think the superpower of being neurodivergent means that we can tolerate discomfort that other people probably can't.
Correct. I agree with that. And those are precisely the points that I'm trying to make, is that it's not a disorder. It is not negative. It's positive. And so the other part about it, which I thought was important when I wrote ADHD Unlocked, and is that I felt that, and I give you an example of this. I send a lot of those away to different people there that I thought needed them, communities, to the counselors of a community. And I did a keynote presentation about 6 months ago west of Prince George, and So in the evening before I was in the hotel, and a person came up to me and he said, I don't want to disturb your dinner, but when you have time, can you stop by my table after you finish your dinner? I said, sure. So I did, and he said to me that he got, as I sent it to the counselors, he was a counselor of one of the other communities, and he said, I got your copy of the book, and I want to thank you for it. He said, I have a son that is 15 years old, is really struggling with ADHD, and we together are struggling with it. And he said, I got your book, and we read it together. Oh my God, that's what it is all about, right? So to share it with, hi sweetheart, to share it with others, and to see that happening is, to me, very, very important. Yeah.
Banana.
I know, sweetheart. I'll be right with you. And I mean, that's why we do what we do, right? I mean, and there's something about creating that. I mean, to me, it's like a legacy move, right? Because you take yourself, you download that, so you can physically give it to somebody and say, here's a thing you can have on your bookshelf forever. That is my best thoughts on this idea, whether that's
exactly
taking risks or working with your ADHD or making friends or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And to your point from before, increasingly mental health professionals are starting to see neurodivergences, so ADHD, dyslexia, giftedness, autism, not as mental illness, right? As different operating systems, right? You might run a Mac, I might run a PC. They're both computers.
Exactly.
The mental part comes with the friction and pain that comes from trying to fit in and navigate a world that doesn't necessarily fit us, right? So it's, what we would call like the depression, the anxiety, the panic attacks, that comes from sort of that friction, rather than ADHD is not a mental illness. It's just a different operating system. Right. And I think that's so empowering. And when I get to be on podcasts, I always try and say that, because it's like, I want the people out there who have different brains like you and I do to hear that and embrace it, right? We're not broken. We're just different.
And so the other thing that, sorry to interrupt you, I get so excited about this. The other thing that I say about it, Matt, is that, like in my book and Dr. Helliwell's and many other books about it, is that I say, especially now, is that this book and other ones were written for the purpose ADHD Unlocked, but it's not only for those people, it is also for slow learners, either affected by trauma or for whatever other reason it may be, it makes it easy for them to read. The other part about it is that the frequency of occurrence of all the above that you just mentioned, not only ADHD, but the other ones, including the items that you mentioned earlier, is that it is important for people that they will encounter people that are slightly different than we are, and so if not only in your family, then in your friends or your workplace, the frequency of occurrence is so that you cannot avoid interacting with them. And it would be important to read the books, just because to understand them is, to say the least, interesting, but they tend to be a little bit different, but that's a positive. So it is helpful to know how they think, how they operate, and how they interact.
And, one of the things I often say to both my clients, and since I'm primarily a child psychologist, right, their parents, but increasingly as I do keynotes and presentations and stuff like that, I'm saying this to CEOs and HR reps and directors and all that stuff. And I say, listen, be curious, not furious.
Exactly.
Right? If somebody is operating differently than you, don't assume ill intent. Get curious about it, right? Maybe somebody's trying to regulate. Maybe somebody's got an idea that's way outside the box, but might just change the way we do everything. And if you find that they're slacking off and screwing up, then it's like, hey, don't do that. Let's get back to work.
What I like about what you're saying now is that you find this interesting, is that we have one of my companies, we hired a senior management person, and so we advertised across Canada for somebody with the skill sets that we laid out and the requirement, and then I put in that also ADHD considered to be an asset.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an interesting approach. And so I got a lot of interaction. We hired somebody successful. I'm not even sure if the person was ADHD, but it got a lot of attention saying that I look at it as an asset in a lot of ways. The other reason that I look at it, and you already mentioned it, that I believe I'm very good in business, because I spent 70 years of my life after I was 13 working in industry of some sort. First a furniture factory, became a furniture maker here, have numerous companies, and became very, very good operating. But I'm also a good speaker and presenter. And so I sit on a number of boards and all kinds of other structures. And then my peers that went through universities and became experts in managing, I do that too. I know what fits in the box. What I do with my ADHD mind, I have to kind of look outside what it looks like on this side, and why are we not doing this, that, or the other thing, or what would happen if, and it makes them sometimes feel uncomfortable, but a lot of times I'm right and I say, yeah, maybe that's the different approach. So I look at it as an asset, and the reason that the frequency of occurrence is so high and successful is the operative, CEOs and entrepreneurs, is because they have ADHD.
There's a book, and I'm not sure if you've read it. I actually feel a little silly recommending a book to you, but I've started it. Might as well follow.
I love it.
The book is How to Be Everything by Emily Wapnick. And I'm telling you, John, there's a half dozen books. There's a dozen books that have changed my life. That one, because I felt like it's speaking to people with brains like ours, neurodivergence, because her whole thing is like, you can do a bunch of different things at the same time. You can change jobs. You can do your job in a different way. You start with your interests and passions and build the thing out from there. You don't start inside the box, because we build our own boxes, right? And just reading that book, I mean, it gave me permission to move from being a full-time psychologist to a full-time psychologist and full-time speaker, and then someone who also teaches and also writes a book, right? And it's not about, am I allowed to do all of those things? It's about, I absolutely can do all of those things. I just need to be intentional about how I set that up.
Right.
And it just felt like somebody handed me a skeleton key to my own life. Click. Yeah. And like walking through the door,
Yeah. I love it. So in your practice, so let me step back a bit here. So when first did you become aware about your ADHD? Were you diagnosed fairly early, or?
I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in high school. I believe it was 11th grade. And so I was 17, and I had a real tough time with it. I always knew I was different. I thought that being gifted explained a lot more of those things. But the more I learned about ADHD, the more I realized, oh, no, that's me. That's me to a T. Yeah. So there's that, coming to grips with your diagnosis is a thing. Yeah. And parents will say to me in my practice, well, I'm worried about the stigma of diagnosis. I don't want to put a label on my kid. And I always say, it's better to know you're a zebra than a weird horse.
Exactly.
Right? And the world is filled with horses, and zebras and horses look very similar, but they need different things to survive.
Exactly.
So if you are somebody who thinks who's been told you're a horse, but you know in your heart you're not a horse. You might just be a zebra. And that's something like diagnosis can really unlock those doors.
Right. So did they already then, Matt, though, recognize that in the school system, and then were accommodating in terms of the learning process that needed some different attention?
Looking back on it, they had sort of created the language you use for it in the States is called the 504 plan.
Okay.
But they had given me sort of an informal 504 plan because I would finish tests and projects so quickly and the teacher got tired of yelling at me to taking out a book that I had at my desk and reading. So they say, fine, you can read when you're done with the test. And doodling on things helps me think. So it was also that I was allowed to doodle on any piece of paper that wasn't, bolted down. And you could always tell when we had a new teacher because I'd be sitting there doodling on a piece of paper. They think I'm not paying attention, right? So they'd be like, Mr. Zakreski, what was the capital of Poland? And without looking up, be like, Warsaw. And I would just keep going.
So that's the amazing part about it, because even when I was going through grade 3, I failed that, and grade 7 3 times, I was very good at writing, and I was very good at math. But all the other things didn't interest me, and and subsequently I failed over and over and over again. But that was back then. Grade 7, I probably was about 12, or 10 and 11, and and even now still, that I'm not sure. In Canada, at least to a certain extent, although we have very good schools, colleges, universities, and all of those kind of things, but still not to the extent that it is recognized, and it's still a stigma around ADHD and a number of other of those areas. And so when I was writing the book, so by coincidence, we have a place in Victoria, so I was flying from Prince George to Vancouver, then Vancouver to Victoria, and so I was sitting on a flight from Vancouver to Victoria, the shortest overseas flight because it's only 12 minutes. But I was sitting next to this person, and he said to me, "You remember me?" I said, "Kind of." He said, "Well, I'm Tom Bromer," and he said, "You were writing a book about." I forget what it was. I said, "Against All Odds." And he said, "How did you make out? It's all done?" I said, "Yeah, it is." I said, "I'm writing another one. It's called ADHD Unlocked." He said, "That's interesting," because he was Dr. Tom Romer. He was the Vice President Academics of the British Columbia Institute of Technology. And he said, "We are looking at a whole different approach to recognizing slow learning of different descriptions, ADHD in particular, and we taking an approach of, they call it micro-certification." I said, "Oh, interesting." So, and then the more I thought about it, then the flight was over and he was gone, I was gone. The following week, purely coincidental, he was sitting on 2A and I was sitting on 5. The flight was full. And I had to kind of yell at him, and I said, Tom, stop by the door because I have to talk to you. Anyway, so all the people said, "What is going on here?" Anyway, so he stopped there, and then I said, "I'm writing this book, ADHD Unlocked, and I think it's very good, but there is something missing in the book, and it's ready to go to the printers, but there is something missing. And what is missing is that, hey, John, okay, nice book, very interesting, blah, blah, blah. I like all the things that you're doing, but where do we go from here?" And that part was missing. So I said to him, "I want to talk to you again about micro-certification. What does it mean?" Well, the focus, what it meant is that if something lasts 3 years, then all the additional things, focus on the core area first and foremost, and then add the other things as you go. And so that to me made a lot of sense, because a lot of people fail or are not successful for whatever reason is simply because it is too many other things involved, too much stuff involved that does not have their interest. And I believe they are doing more and more of that, and likely they have something in the States as well like this, I presume,
And we do. And I'm just sitting here thinking about the story and thinking about how even this story of getting that book done, taking it from good to great, is another example of your brain working differently, because a lot of people would have stopped at that point. The book is done. It's close enough. It's good. Let's send it to the printer. And you said, no, now is the time to add this thing, because that's what makes it exceptional. And
Right.
and I think there is always time to do more and to do better, right? And
Right.
there is something really not only wonderful about that, but brave, right? And there's like the courage that takes is really inspiring.
Interesting. I like that. Now, the other part, Matt, is that I'm also quite involved in another book that I'm writing now, and I'm quite involved at 84, and already for the last 15 years, I don't know about you, there is a shock that goes on somewhere in life, and that you say, I'm going to have to take a look, what am I doing? From a diet perspective, fitness perspective, as you get older and go forward. And so I had a case of diverticulitis, that is rupture of the colon, that ruptured really, and then you have about 48 hours, a lot of pain, but I have a high threshold for pain, and so I waited about 48 hours, and by the time they operated and fixed it or took a piece out of my colon, I came that close to not making it. And so then I knew I had to do something a bit more serious. Now, my wife is a vegetarian, and I didn't listen quite. I was okay, but not as good as I could be. And so I'm a vegan now. But the other part that I did then, and I already was well into my 70s then, and I got myself, we do all the same, so that every year we can say, I'm going to do this, at the end of the year, this, that, and that, and the other one, I'm going to go to the gym, and I buy the membership, and then I go for 2 weeks, and then I can find 100 reasons as to why I can't go anymore. So I knew I had to be more serious about that. So I did that. I got a trainer, went to the gym for about 6-7 years, and then somebody said to us, I take it all very serious, as you well know. That's typical for me. If I go there to work out and be good. So somebody said, have you ever thought about bodybuilding? I said, me? Yeah.
Me?
I said, wow. So, and I started working out harder, and then I went to a bodybuilding contest, Northern BC, came in second in bodybuilding, third in physique, then qualified in the provincials, second in physique, third in bodybuilding, qualified me for the nationals and the Arnolds. And that was in... And then what happened is then COVID came. So now I'm again training for bodybuilding, and going back again at 85 to the Arnolds. And I'm also writing a book about it, Living Young, Dying Old. And this one is done and will come out in June, July. So that's a picture of me. So
I'm just sitting here being like, you're just, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I'm used to being the most interesting person on the podcast. I'm happy to come in second place to you, my friend.
I love it.
I mean, like, and next year you'd be like, oh, by the way, I took up knitting in my spare time, and I actually knit this couch I'm on. Like, goodness me, I would
But
ask how you do it, but I know how you do it. It's yeah.
and that's the point that I was going to make. Now, this is your specialty. So you look at this specimen calling John Brink, and you're sitting here and you're saying, how does he do it? Well, you know how I do it because it's all up here, right? So that's how my mind works. So there you got this guy that failed grade 3 and failed grade 7 3 times, is dyslexic to boot. I do audios of all my books too, amazingly. Probably not quite as quick as others do, but I'm well aware of that. It's been part of me, but everything is possible. And it's attitude, passion, work ethic.
Yep.
That's the foundation.
And that is, and the cool thing about that is that you don't have to go out and get those things.
No.
Right? You don't have to, like, you've got them. We might need to turn the volume up on them, right? But it's, one of the things that I think it's more related to what you said than it might appear on the surface, is that if the flower's not growing, you don't blame the flower, you change the greenhouse, right? Yeah. Sometimes we're not in an environment that allows us to tap into our full potential of work ethic, drive, passion. Sometimes you're someone who wants to play jazz piano, but they really want you to just play the Canadian national anthem over and over and over and over and over forever. Right? You need to find the environment that lets you do those things and tap into that. So
exactly,
and I say this to everyone who will listen to me. It's like, if you will give people the strengths and the tools and the opportunities to play to those strengths, I mean, just get back and watch the rocket ship go up. I mean, people will surprise you with just how awesome they are. And that's why I think that's why we do what we do, right? Yeah. It's letting people soar.
And that point, Matt, but I do a lot of presentation, young people, high schools, colleges, university, and what I usually say, it took me a while to get there, but I believe that so often people are critical of themselves, young people in particular, male, female more so likely sometimes as males, understandably so, but both sexes for that matter. And I say, I believe respectfully that we are all special and unique. There is only one of us. And believe that have that confidence that you are unique and different. Don't preoccupy yourself with this is not quite well, and society is very demanding of how we look or how we dress and all those kind of things, and the focus should not be there. It should be more on things that you are good at, because you are good in certain areas. Discover them, and then feel good about it, and then give it all that you got. I find also that anytime that I do presentations at colleges and schools and universities and high schools, a lot of times I say respectfully again, is saying that if you got any ideas what you want to do, because a lot of time of your life you're going to be working either in a career or whatever, if you got any ideas where you want to go, and a lot of them say, no, I don't know, so, and then I listened to a program in the United States, I think on CNN, one of those guys, is that they said 70% of the working people in the United States don't like their jobs, and 75% of the 70% are looking for another job. I said, so I wrote a book about that as well. So I thought, I wrote this on, finding your passion, living the dream, and saying, okay, so John, after working since you were 13, now nearly 84, so having been working for 70 years, Are you living the dream? I sure am. Every day I get up at 5:30 in the morning, make my bed, and I'm always in a hurry, and I love the things that I'm doing. And so the point that I'm making there is twofold. The one is that you must believe you are special in who you are. And then the other part is that the earlier you start thinking about a direction in life, at least in a general sense, that likely will be helpful in making the choices of where do you want to go. And you are a perfect example, and so am I probably, is that you knew that you felt that you had the special feeling towards neurodiversity, and then that you wanted to make a career around that, and you are very good at it, obviously in-demand speaker and writer and a person of knowledge. And for me, what happened with me is that I developed that dream of being liberated by the Canadians and knowing that I wanted to go to the land of my heroes. And then because of the adversity that I encountered during my early years, failing grade 3 to grade 7, and wondering who am I, that I said, I'm going to go to Canada, start with nothing, and I'm going to build a lumber mill. Well, I did, and then much more than that. And then, and so, but at the same time, although the road was difficult, and as you already know from this book, it's not about how successful John is. No, it is staying the course and not giving up. And I believe, looking back, those were the right choices, although they were difficult, and it became the foundation in my life, the challenges, Second World War, seeing more than we should have seen. Even in the Hunger Winter of 1944-45, which we called the Hunger Winter, I can still, even now, 80 years later, feel the hunger, and it was the coldest winter on record. And the kids, myself, my brother, 2 years older than me, my sister 1 year older, we would go in the morning with gunny sacks in the railroad yard, pick up anything edible and burnable. And then anxiety of losing our parent, because my dad was lost in the bombing of Rotterdam, so they were alone for 5 years, and then seeing more than we should have. But all of that in combination with the challenges, and then still building the challenge from there, and I believe ADHD helped me in being focused on, I was going to Canada, to the lands of my heroes, and I was going to build a lumber mill. And then still acquiring all the skill sets to manage this, and learning the language, and acquiring the skill sets to manage multi-million-dollar big companies, and being very, very good at it.
Yeah, it's really, when you think about the idea that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it, right? Exactly. I think that's the key to all of my therapy practice, right? For better or for worse, I tell my clients, it's like, yeah, bad stuff happens. My job is not to keep bad stuff from happening to you. It's about preparing you to respond, to put as many tools in your toolbox as possible to respond to those challenges, because life will kick us in the knee. Life will throw dirt in our eyes. What are you going to do about it, right? And, many people would have given in your situation, and I don't mean objectively speaking, who would blame you? And yet here you are, 60 years later, 80 years later, math is hard, a wildly successful person, not just in one avenue, but in multiple avenues, right? And the idea is, when we focus on what we can control, our responses, then we're betting on ourselves. And I'm always going to tell you to bet on yourself, right? Exactly. That's what allows us to tap into our ability to be remarkable.
Yeah, and have that confidence that you are special, not better than, but special as a unique individual, the only one like that on this earth. And all these other challenges, turn them into assets, not liabilities. And by the other thing that I find amazing, Matt, is there we are sitting here, and you being close to New York City, there I'm sitting in central British Columbia on the other side of the continent, and while we are discussing these amazing stories and these amazing backgrounds and the things that we both are doing, but in the meantime, in virtual television and virtual podcasting, we already know tens of thousands of people are watching us.
Yeah.
I find, and it's just at the beginning.
I mean, it's humbling, right? It's humbling in the way that I never knew this was going to happen for me, right? I knew I was going to be a great therapist because I genuinely care about the kids I work with and I understand what neurodivergence is. And the more I talk, the more podcasts I'm on and conferences I'm at. I actually was speaking at a conference this morning and I told this story. I go back and I watch the tape of myself. I have the first talk I ever gave on tape and I watch it and it's brutal, John. It's hard to watch, right? You know, you want that like right.
Yeah.
But I watch it to remind myself how far I've come, and also that you have to give yourself permission to be a beginner, whether it's giving talks or starting companies or becoming a father, right? Which we both are. Like, you don't get to be good at something.
No.
You go on the journey to be good at something,
Exactly.
and you look back at yourself doing a podcast to however many thousands of people right now. And if I can just say, I think we're crushing it. I think we're doing awesome. And, and that's not by accident, right? Failure happens to us, but success is on purpose.
Exactly. Matthew, I loved our Dr. Matt, I loved our podcast. We can go and speak for another hour or two. We want to stay in touch. And then, I'm going to send you copies of my books. And then this podcast was live. And for all those people watching, I hope they make comments on us and to see more of these kind of podcasts and to watch also other podcasts that we already have done, both you and me. And let's make sure we stay in touch.
It would be my great pleasure. And when my book's done, can I send you a copy as well?
Absolutely. And I'll get Scott to stay in touch with you.
Thank you so much, sir. This was a true pleasure. I really appreciate your time. And like you said, I could talk to you all night.
Yeah, me too. And I love to have your daughter with us in the podcast. That made it even more special.
I'll tell her, and she'll be very.
We love her. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.